Nothing murders the beauty of the Italian language quite like an Australian accent. So this is the only time in the video I'm going to attempt Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio Verde. Happily, Alfa itself just uses QV, and while the Giulia's been around a while now, it's just enjoyed a fairly significant update. This is as good an excuse as any to see if the Italian sports sedan can still cut it in the face of newer opposition. I'll run you through the car in detail, but if you want to skip ahead to the driving, use the time codes below. Before we get into it, like the video, subscribe to the Car Sales channel, and leave us a comment with your thoughts. The market has moved on significantly since the Giulia QV first appeared in 2017. Back then, its contemporaries were the F80 BMW M3 and W205 Mercedes C63, which have both switched to all new generations in the interim. They've also had hefty price increases, so while the 2024 Giulia is around $10,000 more expensive than before, it now undercuts an M3 competition by almost $20,000 and a C63 AMG by almost $35,000. There have been a few visual tweaks, new headlights, a revised grille, and the LED headlights are now adaptive matrix units. It remains a great looking car, though personally I'm not sure it's quite as nice as the Giulia Veloce. But anyway, there is some serious hardware here though. Massive brakes and carbon ceramics are an option, an active front spoiler, and the tyres are Pirelli P0 Corsas as standard, which is incredibly aggressive even for a performance car. Alfa offers a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty and 5 years roadside assist, but be prepared when it comes to service time, as you'll need almost $5,500 over the first 5 visits. Ouch. Underneath the carbon fibre bonnet, the 2.9 litre twin-turbo V6 remains unchanged, which is no bad thing. An 8-speed automatic is your only gearbox option, but one of the biggest changes to this new Giulia QV can't be seen at all. A new mechanical limited slip differential replacing the previous electronically controlled one. And that's important for reasons I'll come to later on. The first thing you'll notice inside the 2024 Giulia QV is this new 3D carbon fibre. It's quite odd, very textural, very different to the shiny stuff you see in most cars and you get here on the steering wheel. It reminds me most of like a wicker basket, and it's on the center console, dash and doors. The other thing you'll notice is the massive bolstering in this seat. You can adjust it using buttons hidden down the side of the seat here, and the seats themselves are very comfy. I'm just not sure how they'd go for larger folk. The seats are electric with memory though, and also heated. It just doesn't feel as flash or as expensive as say the new M3 or C63 in here, but there are advantages to that. It's a very simple cabin to operate, lots of physical switches and dials, got wireless charging now, driving position is very, very good, but there isn't much storage. You can't fit drinks in the doors, for instance, and it just doesn't have the wow factor of some of its newer rivals. What it does have though are some very special touches, chief among which are these enormous shift paddles, which are real metal. So bloody cold first thing on a winter's morning, but it does give it that baby Ferrari vibe. All the main tech features are there, though smartphone mirroring is wired, not wireless. The Giulia has had an infotainment upgrade during its life, but it still feels a bit off the pace. It works well enough in terms of touch responsiveness and navigation, but its size and resolution certainly aren't a match for its German rivals, especially when you activate the rear view camera, which is on the small side. Another big change for this update is the inclusion of a fully digital instrument cluster. This makes me a bit sad as I'm a weirdo who likes analog dials, especially in a car like this, but it does work pretty well and has some character. There are a number of different screens to choose from, and it goes all angry when you select race mode. Here in the back, space is okay. Can be a bit tricky to get in and out because the driver's seat is easy access, so slides itself back, and headroom's a little tight as well. Materials in general are pretty good. We've got more of this 3D carbon fibre, but these big slabs of hard plastic on the back of the front seats feels a bit cheap at more than 150 grand. You've also only got the one USB-A port for charging. No powered boot here, but there is a decent amount of space, so that's partly because there's no spare tyre of any kind, just an inflation kit. The key thing though, is now the Giulia QV is getting on a bit in years, how does it stack up behind the wheel? Possibly the most impressive aspect of the Giulia QV driving experience is how relaxed it is, at least with the drive selector set to N for natural. In fact, if you didn't know better, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd bought the Veloce by mistake. The ride is unbelievably comfortable. It's so soft and pillowy that you have to be careful going over some speed bumps, as it'll actually kiss the nose on the ground coming down. The engine is muted, the throttle's pretty unresponsive, the gearbox is smooth. It's all quite undramatic really. It's not perfect. You get some creaks and groans from the brakes when you release them from a standstill. There's a bit of wind noise and tyre roar and coarse chipped surfaces, and low speed manoeuvres can have the front wheels crabbing due to the geometry. That said, it's a very pleasant and relaxing car to cruise around in. This calm demeanour only makes it all the more shocking when you select D for dynamic and finally floor the throttle. Oh, this is a truly outrageously fast car. Now, the chief engineer of the Giulia QV was Philippe Creef, who had just completed a fairly spectacular project called the Ferrari 458 Speciale. Creef is now actually the CEO of Alpine, but his position as Ferrari's head of R&D prior to taking on the Giulia means there are little Ferrari signatures everywhere in this car. The steering is quite light and very direct. It takes a while to sort of get used to it and key into its responses. And another Ferrari trick is the bumpy road button. This feature first appeared on the 430 Scuderia at the behest of a certain Michael Schumacher. Whatever drive mode you're in, it allows you to knock the dampers down a mode in terms of softness. So you can be in dynamic and still have soft dampers, or you can be in race and have stiff, but not ultra firm dampers. Ironically, the one car that probably doesn't need such a button is the Giulia, as even in dynamic, the ride is perfectly acceptable, but it's nice to have the option regardless. It's been a few years since I've driven a Giulia QV, and honestly, I'd forgotten just what a weapon this thing is. It also doesn't drive how you'd expect it to, or at least not how I expected it to, and I've driven one before. You look at the stats, 375 kilowatts, 600 newton meters, rear wheel drive, and think it's going to be traction limited and a bit wild, but it just isn't. I've searched high and low to see if, like Ferraris, the Giulia QV has torque by gear to improve traction, but I can't find any evidence that it does. So it must be just these tyres. Having P0 courses gives this thing incredible grip at both ends, and all the various attributes, the quick steering, the big brakes, the huge power, coalesce into an awesome driving experience. The engine isn't the most tuneful or charismatic thing in the world. I think Ferrari's 296 is the only car in history to ever have a nice sounding turbo V6, but it sounds okay and makes some interesting blurts and upshifts. Now there is still a few things to cover, but I can't really do that on the public road. See, until now, I've been in dynamic, but there is another stage to unlock, which is race. However, selecting this completely disables the stability and traction control. So, let's go somewhere where we won't disturb anybody. Aside from being able to let this thing properly off the leash, there are a couple of reasons why we need to bring the Giulia QV to the track. Early QVs had a couple of very weird quirks surrounding the brakes and the diff. I'll go through each in turn and then talk about what the car's like more generally. This was one of the first cars to adopt brake-by-wire. So there's no mechanical connection to the pedal. You press the brakes, it then sends an electronic signal to the braking system, which figures out what it thinks that you want. Now, there are lots of reasons why Alfa went with this system, which I won't go into here, and they all sound very good on paper. Don't most things. But as a result, this car had one of the weirdest brake feels on track. You'd approach a corner, mash the brakes, and for a heart-stopping fraction of a second, nothing would happen. And then it would stop with a force few cars could manage. It would just stand on its nose. Effective, but not particularly natural in the way it felt. Thankfully, it's something that seems to have been fixed, because now, press the pedal, and it just stops without that worrying pause. It's actually got really good feel too. It's really easy to modulate. That's one of the other problems with these systems sometimes, is that because there's no sort of mechanical connection, it can feel a bit artificial, but you can modulate this really easily. And when you need to stop, it stops. Oh, it's actually really impressive. The second quirk was also electronic. Up until this update, the Giulia QV used an electronically controlled limited slip diff. Now again, in theory, that sounds great, being able to send the power to the wheel that's got the most grip when it needs it. But in reality, again, it could just be inconsistent. Sometimes it would lock up really well, other times it wouldn't lock up enough, and then other times it would sort of switch between the two and then make things feel pretty awkward, even if you weren't trying to be a hooligan. Could just make it, again, inconsistent, and that is the last thing you want in a performance car. Thankfully, this also seems to have been fixed. Now, there's no more electronics, just big bits of metal being mashed together. As a result, it just seems to lock up beautifully whenever you want it. This car is so predictable. All right, it seems happily that both those quirks in the early QVs have been definitely fixed. We've got great brake feel with none of that inconsistency. And again, we've got a diff that does exactly what we want it to when we want it to do it. Now, as a result, this thing is just a heap of fun. Now, it's probably not as adjustable in terms of chassis balance as, say, an M3. If I just flick it into the brakes, it kind of goes. It's not quite as adjustable. Still got a bit of playfulness in it, but you can't really sort of just have it on a string like you can with, say, an M3 or an F-Type. But it is still an absolute monster of a car. It's so fast. I'm absolutely burning through these corners. The engine, again, isn't the most charismatic thing, but geez, it's got some power and some punch. And here in race mode, it's in its most aggressive setting, and it's got fantastic response too. Great brakes. Steering doesn't give you, a massive amount of feedback. Again, that's kind of a Ferrari thing, but the quickness and the accuracy means you can absolutely place it where you want to. And because of those coarser tyres, it hangs on. It's got so much grip. It's got so much grip under brakes, mid-corner, and under traction. Gearbox might be just a torque converter auto, but it is plenty fast and responsive. Will down change to high res if you need it to. And of course, being a rear-wheel drive with 500 horsepower, you can play with it at will on the throttle. Man, this thing might be a few years old now, but it still puts such a smile on your face. This is not a perfect car. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given its age, it's fallen behind its competitors in terms of tech, and the interior was never the class leader to begin with. Honestly, it's a car you've got to make some excuses for. But equally, it's a car you will happily make those excuses for because of the way it looks, the way it feels, but most importantly, the way it drives. Long may it continue. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to the Car Sales channel, and let us know in the comments below cars you'd like to see us review.